Bueno, voy a hacer en inglés, because obviously. Ya, empiezo, Alex. Okay.
Dale.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to be doing a 3776 presentation. We're going to talk about how it reinvented Fire Emblem. If you have any question at any moment, feel free to interrupt me. So let's go. I'm going to try to go as fast as I can, but without being too rash, because I don't want to make this too long. So basically, Thracia 776 was a game that was launched September 1999, and it was the fifth game of the saga. For anyone who doesn't know, Fire Emblem kind of invented or made popular the uh, tactical warfare genre. And the whole thing that you do in this game is you move through a grid, and you have a certain amount of movement. And when you're in range of an enemy, you can do a lot of things, but mainly what you want to do is attack them. And if you have more or less planned what you were doing, you would kill them or at least deal damage to them, which is kind of the whole point. Then Fire Emblem kind of is built in some principles that focus around this loop of attacking enemies, which are basically the victory condition is what determines what you're doing and if you're doing it well. The leveling up, which is kind of the progression of the game, and the execution of the player, what the player is doing. It usually means not getting your units killed, which is kind of like the best thing you can do in the game, but it also encompasses other things. So these are kind of what every Fire Emblem game is based in. It's the progression, it's the objective, and it's the performance. So I think this is kind of important to explain to, you know, be able to say what Thracia changes with its mechanics. And to be able to discuss that, we first have to talk about the rescue mechanic because it's kind of going to give us a common ground to understand where I'm trying to go. So the rescue mechanic, it's quite simple. Basically, when you're next to an ally and you wait more than them, you can rescue, and that means that you can kind of get them on the same tile as you are. This basically what means is that you are invalidating any damage that that unit can take, but it has a cost. It has a risk that we're going to talk later. Another cool thing that you can do is that if you have another ally that weighs more than the rescued unit, you can transfer them from the rescuing unit, and then you can be the one doing the rescue. And what is cool is that when you rescue, you lose your turn. Your unit, the rescuing unit, cannot move anymore. But if you transfer, you can trade items with any unit that you have adjacent or with the rescue unit, and you can drop the unit away. So why is this cool? Basically, when you have a unit rescued, in this game at least, your stats get halved. So that's like kind of the big risk that you're facing. You're putting a unit to safety in exchange for your own performance in battle. So what this is usually used in is the context of, oh no, one of my units just lost a lot of health and I don't have a way to move them out of the enemy range. So what I do is rescue them with another unit, right? That's kind of the way you use it. Another way to use it, which I found more useful, is to move units through a map. Cavalry units tend to have a lot of move, so if you rescue a unit with a cavalry unit, you can move them away faster. But that's more of a secondary, technically, use to the mechanic. Now, I have problems with this mechanic, and those problems exist so that it doesn't make it a game killer. This is more of a support mechanic that is there. It doesn't annoy anyone. It's not like anything that is a detriment to the game, but it's not a game killer. And that is because of certain reasons that I'm going to explain. Basically, imagine the unit on the left. It's a bad unit, doesn't have a lot of stats, performs bad in combat. If you put that unit on the front lines and then you have to rescue that unit, that kind of makes sense because it's a bad unit. Of course, it would perform poorly in combat. But the question is, why would you put a bad unit to make the combat instead of a good unit? Kind of the only answer I can think about is if you were trying to level them up, but there's better ways to do that than just putting them in the front lines. So basically, what we are concluding rationally is that the way to confront big enemies or big flocks of enemies is with good units, for example, Dalsin in this case. So basically, if you have to rescue a good unit, you, as we've said before, what you're doing is putting another unit in risk instead of that first unit. So if you have to rescue a good unit, are you going to do it with another good unit? doesn't make a lot of sense because if the first good unit is in danger of being killed, it basically means that the second one is going to be as well. So basically, this only becomes useful when that rescuing process means that you're gonna get outside of enemy range, or only in some range of some enemies, or that the first unit will have killed a lot of enemies, and then there's some left that pose a threat to that first unit, but not to a fully healed unit. So what basically means is it's very situational. It's something that it's kind of not very predominant within your gameplay, and it's not something that you should strategize in mind with, but rather it's something that serves to correct mistakes. Although of course you can do it, but it's more usually used to correct mistakes or to prevent some situations that you couldn't foresee at the beginning of the map or whatever. Another problem that I have, and this is kind of important, it's probably the biggest perk I have with the mechanic, is that if you're rescuing with a character, another character, it means that you're wasting two turns because the rescued character cannot move because they are rescued, and the rescuing character cannot move because they have rescued. So in this case, if you have two units and three enemies, instead of killing two enemies and leaving only one, what you're doing is doing nothing and then getting attacked by three enemies. The rescue mechanic is supposed to be a defensive move that what does is making you take more damage. So it kind of counters its own purpose. It makes no sense, which, as I said, makes it a very situational thing. For these kind of things, what you do them is when you have all your units around, and therefore killing or sparing enemies is not so important to do it with your current units because you have others to do the job for you. And lastly, to kind of put the topping on the cake, this game has a lot of staffs. There's a lot of utility staffs. You can heal from distance. You can teleport any unit anywhere in the map at any point. You can teleport your healers. You can kind of in silence units. That basically means they cannot use magic. You can heal any kind of stat, like poisoning or berserk or whatever. Like there's so many things you can do with staffs, and they are so prevalent that you're basically gonna have one in each map at least. Like I've gone at maps with 4 healers because they are just that useful. So basically, if you can heal people from the distance or just heal people in general or teleport them anywhere, why would you rescue them and waste another unit's turn instead of using the support unit that's kind of doing their job, supporting the team? So basically, the rescue mechanic, situational, cool, but not game killer. Now, we're going to the capture mechanic. This is the good stuff. This is what makes Thracia 776 what it is, and what I think, although I have really no proof to it, is what was the core mechanic that the designers kind of pushed forward when starting to design this game. So basically, what is the capture mechanic? It's the same as the rescue mechanic. It's literally the same, but with enemies. You can capture enemies. If your weight is higher than your enemy's weight, you capture them. It's fairly simple. The cool stuff of this is that if you want to capture an enemy, your stats get halved before you have captured them, which is basically means that the high risk, high reward situation that we had with rescue, it's even more amplified because now you're risking your unit's life by trying to capture an enemy. It's not that they are being endangered by their positioning, is that by directly confronting an enemy, they have a chance of dying because they just have worse stats. And because this is a game that is very numerical, everything is based on stats and numbers and weapons. This is kind of important. This is kind of making a very big difference, which means that either you have a really good unit killing a really crappy unit, or you have to strategize around this to avoid unnecessary casualties. And of course, if you succeed, you can see that there's the TRVLR, which means traveler, which is the unit that you have captured. In this case, there's a Loptian mage, which is the enemy. So hooray, you've done it successfully. Then once you have captured, in the same way as you could with the rescue, you can transfer, you can trade. But the cool stuff, of course, is that now you can trade with the enemy. You can get the enemy's weapons. And this is kind of a game changer because basically means that anything that's being used against you, you can use against the enemy if you capture them. And of course, once you transfer, you can drop the unit and avoid all penalties. which again is kind of a very important move because it gives you that option of avoiding the risk if you have planned correctly your movement and your positioning on the map. Problem is that no one cares. And this kind of makes sense because it doesn't really matter how good it looks in paper. We don't even know if it looks good in paper. We just know that this thing became a mechanic in the game. But once they were designing it, they wouldn't really know how well it interacted with the rest of mechanics and systems in the game. Spoiler alert, it's amazing. But for the time being, they didn't really know it, probably. So basically, should we make the player care, right? And that point shows Okaga, who is like the creator of the series and director of this game, was like, okay, so what's the relevance of the capture mechanic? And this, I feel like it's the most, well, not the most, but a very vital slide. So if like I can ask you to pay attention to anything, it's like this. Basically, it's asking for meaningful decisions, and it's constantly, it's at every battle that you're taking, is making you ask if the weapon of the enemy is worth enough that you would risk having worse stats and risking either not capturing or being killed in the process for that weapon. And of course, because this game has permadeath, in this game if a unit dies, they keep dead, unless it's the main protagonist, in which case the game is over and then you have to start them up again. But in any other case, you are risking that unit, and that creates a constant loop of decision making that sees its importance amplified, because it's not just anymore, does my unit have better stats than the enemy unit, is should I take that risk or not. Of course, that also emphasizes the strategic value, because basically the whole idea is that if you have moved, right, there's this division. There's the player phase and the enemy phase. The player phase is when you move, the enemy phase is when the enemy move, and they alternate each other. So basically, if an enemy that has a good weapon attacks you in enemy phase, you cannot capture them because you are not doing anything. The AI is working by itself. So basically, if they suicide against you or they kill a good unit of yours, it's a bad situation, either because, of course, you lost the unit or you lost the weapon that you wanted. So basically, what this means is that you have to prioritize checking weapons and knowing which enemies do you want to capture and whatnot before the battle begins, which basically is organically creating a necessity on the player to think what they are doing and to know how they want to confront the map. It stops being a matter of what is the victory condition, how can I accomplish it, and rather it becomes how can I um, face the goals that I myself need to accomplish to have a better performance. And this, of course, affects the long term uncertainty because you don't really know which weapons are going to come in handy. Maybe you get a really good weapon that doesn't really have a good use. For example, there's a weapon that lets you do long range attacks. And maybe because you go with like the whole army together always, you never really get a chance to attack units that are far off because you're always concerned on whatever is in front of you. But on the other hand, you might find a situation in which um, there's a weapon that you didn't really plan to use and just kind of was there, but you suddenly get a new unit, and then now that new unit becomes really good because you got that weapon, and then suddenly that decision that you took becomes extra meaningful because it's serving you in a way that you hadn't planned, even though you kind of actually planned it because, well, you took that weapon. So it adds another layer to the game. And of course, it also has kind of a moral question whether to kill or not to kill, because technically speaking, you could spare every enemy on the game. You could capture everyone because when you capture someone, you're not killing them, you're just capturing them. Duh. So there's also that, but we don't really talk about the moral question because it's not really that prevalent. We're going to talk about it later, but kind of in another context. But it's also there. I also wanted to point it out that it exists. It has this essence within the mechanic. So basically, what this all comes to say is that the capture mechanic gives player agency. It's telling the player you can literally like go full capture everyone, or you can go full kill everyone. And whatever spectrum you are within the middle of those two extremes is absolutely your decision. It's your decision to take when you want to take those risks and when you just want to avoid them. which, as we all know, kind of player agency is very cool because it allows for a better experience overall. So basically, we have kind of discerned that yes, the capture mechanic is really cool. It does good stuff. It allows player agency. That's good. So how do we make the player care? So now we're basically going to see the different ways in which the designers decided to make this relevant and how they tweaked the usual formula of Fire Emblem to actually achieve this. So the main thing is weapons, right? Weapons are not given with a lot of frequency. In fact, your basically every weapon that you're gonna get is gonna be from capturing enemies, and of course, the good weapons are in the hands of the enemies. For example, in this case, Alwyn, her Dire Thunder is her kind of her standard weapon, but the Bolting, the Thoran, and the other Dire Thunder, those three are stolen weapons. They are amazing. They all have their particular uses, and basically they improve the unit far from her initial potential, just because I thought to put my units at risk to get those weapons. Another thing that's very interesting is the cap, the stat cap. So basically, in this game, you can level up to level 20, and then you can promote, and then get another 20 levels, which means that theoretically, although there are units that are already promoted, there's also units that join you at like level 7 or 10 or whatever, but theoretically, you have 40 levels to grow. However, the stat cap is at 20, except for HP, which is 80, but no one really ever caps HP. No one really cares about HP, so there's that. And because your stat cap is 20, you don't really need a lot of effort to grow to that point. Like, you don't really take too long to reach your best potential in terms of stats. And any unit that has good growths that levels up decently, which is like a lot, will have their stats needed for battle um, capped or close to that by when they reach level 20, which means that it's very easy to get units that perform well theoretically. But the cool thing is that because this cap stat is so low, what dictates the performance of a unit in battle, it's the weapons, not the stats themselves. And that's a huge change of the game, because it it is kind of saying that whoever got the best weapon wins, and it stops being a matter of who has more level, which kind of breaks with the RPG convention that we kind of have in mind. So basically, to give an example, and I don't really have a screenshot or anything, but there was a boss in the final map that had 12 attack. That's like half the attack that you can have of maximum. So just because that boss's weapon was good, they were dangerous. So that's kind of proving the point that yes, weapons are so vital. And as I said, the way to get weapons, it's to use the capture mechanic. So it's organically forcing the player to interact or to play the way they want. Kind of like, happens in Dark Souls. That basically is a game that says, hey, if you wanna survive, if you wanna have a good easy time, play right. Don't just go mindlessly attacking everything. So in this game, kind of the same, but of course in a different direction because it's a different genre. Another thing that it does, and it is kind of stupid because comparing economies of different games doesn't make no sense, because basically it depends on the amount of income that you have, not so much the kind of numbers that exist within the shops. But this is kind of a good example because basically in the lower image in Path of Radiance, some of the best stuff in the game cost 2,000, 4,000. In Thracia, the worst weapons in the game, the most basic weaponry in the game, cost 2,000. Except the Iron Axe, because they bully the Iron Axe. I don't know why it's worth less, but it's there, whatever. Another cool thing that Thracia does, it gives you no money. Like I had 12,000 gold in my game. That's because I'm a dirty cheater. I play with save states, so I farmed the arena because I'm obsessed with getting level ups and bullshit. So there's kind of that. But if you're just playing 3776, you're not gonna get 12,000 gold. No, no way. The arena is extremely dangerous as well, so it's not like you can farm it by default in a normal game. So basically, spending 2,000 gold on a fucking iron sword, it's a joke. Just it's preposterous, especially because you can just go to an enemy and capture the enemy, and they're probably gonna have a better weapon. So it's basically telling you this exists in case that you get so incredibly bad at this game that you couldn't manage to manage your weapons, as redundant as that is. Because yes, this game has management. Basically, if you're capturing, if you're playing as it's supposed to, it will reach a point in which you will have 128 items. Hooray! You reach the cap, you cannot have more items. So there's also a layer that by capturing, it introduces management mechanics, which is it's pretty cool. So basically, through all of these, the game is very subtly telling you that yes, capturing is important. Now, we are facing a problem though, because as much as the capture system is well implemented and has been properly directed to the player, a new problem has emerged. Because through this design, what we have incentivized is killing one of the principles that we talked about, progression. We are not leveling up, or if we're leveling up, we're doing it so meaningful. Ah, that's a difficult word. Well, less meaningful, I mean, because the whole thing is that if you cap at 20 and you have 40 levels to level up, there's kind of going to be 20 level ups that you're not really gaining stats. And that is problematic, of course, because it makes the player feel like they are not really doing anything. It makes the player feel like they are wasting their time or that they are not playing properly. They are wasting experience. That's something that in Fire Emblem it's kind of, especially in the community, is very prominent. Like the fact that you're wasting experience means that you're playing wrong, that you're not optimizing combat as much as you should. So basically, to avoid this, the fatigue system was introduced. Literally, this system is a whole thing that just existed so that capture could be done more entertainingly. So what is this whole thing, right? Well, as you can see, Sarah FATG at the fatigue system, well, the symbol rather, it has a 26, and her HP, her health point, is 25. This basically means that the next time that you choose which units to go to combat with, she is going to be fatigued. If the fatigue is higher than the HP, you're fatigued. That's as simple as it is. And there's ways to kind of cheat this. For example, there's an S string. It's an object that if you equip it to the unit, basically that unit is not fatigued, even if they technically are. And basically, this is also a good way. It has other uses, like the fatigue system also avoids clerics and swordsmen and very offensive kind of units to actually be overused, and it tends to prefer other units that maybe are not so powerful in combat, but who have more defensive or more strategic capabilities. And it also makes perfect narrative sense because the units that have less stamina are easier to get tired. That's kind of the definition of having less stamina, is that you get tired faster. So it makes total sense that the HP would be the regulator of fatigue. By the way, the fatigue is acquired by doing literally anything except I think if you move, you don't get fatigue, but any action, any interaction in the game gives you fatigue. And basically, the whole point of the system, as I said, was to balance capture, but it also serves in relation to the stat capping, because what it's doing is two main things. It's avoiding the usage of a single unit. It's avoiding the strategy of I overpower a unit with so many numbers, I'm gonna grow them so much that they are gonna be invincible. This game doesn't allow that. With a stat cap of 20, in which the weapon makes it so much more prominent who is going to have the upper hand in battle, kind of you can just overpower anyone. You need weapons, and good weapons don't come until the later game. So basically anyone who goes with this strategy is going to face a wall and they're going to get taken down. So a way to prevent that was the fatigue system. Because if you use a unit a lot, you're going to get fatigued, which means that you're going to have to change to other units. In that way, it also corrects a problem that this game is difficult, so it's very easy to lose units. So basically, by leveling up all your units, what you're achieving is that at some point when your units die, you have other units that are decent enough to pull you through the game. And of course, this also relates to the idea that we talked about around here of the stat capping. Because stat capping is so low, it's easier to get better units faster. So kind of everything relates and connects, which is pretty cool. Other things, like the designers also understood that kind of restricting the player to a very specific game style was not very cool. So they gave them some alleyway. Like the Master Seal It's an object introduced in this game. It would be extremely misused in the future games, but for now, this is an extremely good acquisition for the franchise. It's basically an object that says, hey, you lost a lot of good units or you haven't leveled up properly, whatever you want, this is going to give you extra stats so you can keep playing and not having a harder time that you usually would already have by playing this game. Other things that it does, it gives you the scrolls, some scrolls that give you better growth, which means you level up better, which means faster, which is also a way to say, don't worry about your stats and play the game and capture and be strategic. Don't be limited by not having trained before. Again, by using the weapons, that also it kind of negates the importance of leveling up. And of course, this gives you a lot of diversity. You're using a lot of units, you're using a lot of tactics, strategy. It avoids stagnation. It's basically the way to avoid always using the best or more optimal strategy that the player knows. It's a way to tell them diversify, do other things. So, where am I going with this? Oh, right. So more things that the design decisions that are very interesting. So we kind of have layered the three kind of main things that are the capture mechanic and the importance of weapons, the stat cap to avoid overpowering units that would hurt the idea of the capture mechanic, and the fatigue system to regulate both of those. So other small things that exist in the game and that are not really that prevalent, but some of them are touches of genius. For example, in this image, you can see that the heat is 499. I couldn't get a 199 because this is like the final map and it's difficult for units to be that bad. But basically, that 99 is not arbitrary. It's not like, oh, well, it's not 100, it's 99. Because the whole premise in this game is that you never have a 0% or 100%. The heat and avoidance of every enemy is comprised between 1 and 99. And that kind of breaks me because it's extremely stupid. It's inconsequential. It practically has no real meaning because the difference of a 1% is negligible, really. But the thing is that the moment in which you miss a 99 or you're hit by a 1%, that thing sticks in your mind. That's psychologically, you know that every quote unquote safe move is not really a safe move. It's a potentially catastrophic move that's going to screw you over forever, but it's really a 1%, so there's no real, like, there's no way to make it any better. You have to take it. So basically, like, this is almost non-relevant, but it sets the tone so well. It's basically a way to say anything could happen. This is war. There's nothing safe. Every encounter can be a death penalty for anyone. And I think that's really cool, and I don't think it's done in any other game, but like, it breaks me a lot. Another thing that this game does is healing can miss. um, Basically the probability of a healing or any staff really working is comprised within that 199% thing, but it's also tied to a formula, and that formula depends on your stats. So basically, in the early game, you're gonna miss healing quite a bit, and you can say that's kind of stupid, and it is, but it's also a good way to condition the player to actually say, hey, you can do like always. You cannot just throw your units at battle and then if some get hurt, you heal them, right? You have to think with your head. You have to strategize. You have to know what you're doing and have backup plans and kind of utilize all the weapons, including the rescue mechanic, because when your healing misses and you have to keep a unit safe, you cannot just consider the healing at the end of the turn. You have to actually properly consider everything. And that's very cool because, again, it's a way to condition the player to organically play the game as it is intended. Another cool thing that it does, it's staffs. As I said, staffs are very versatile in this game. Things that you can do is stealing objects from other units, or you can make them go berserk. You can literally make any enemy unit attack other enemy units. Well, not really any, because there are some exceptions, but generally that applies. And what is cool about that is that you can create situations in which you can have a better battle performance by understanding what these staffs do and by understanding how enemy behavior actually works. So basically, in this case, Reinhardt, which is like the guy in the horse, is probably one of the strongest bosses in the whole game. And instead of facing him head on, what you can do is berserk him, and then he kills all his squad, and then facing him becomes vastly easier. And this is something I did on my playthrough, It's not something I knew that like could be done. Like I did it kind of blindly, and it was like, right, I could do that. Let's try it, and it worked, and it was amazing. And then when I was doing this presentation, I found this comic in which they used the same strategy as I did, and it was like, oh, that's so cool. Because again, Thracia incentivizes you to think and strategize, and that gives you more dynamic gameplay. Pretty cool. It has other things like the lead and the move stars and the supports. Not really going to talk about them. They're kind of more um, generalized. There are things that are found in other games, although the move stars not so much, but I don't think it's important enough. So basically, kind of the final part of the first part of this presentation is the conclusion that Fire Emblem is basically there you have a lot of enemies, kill them and reach the end of the map. Hooray, you did it. Thracia instead is asking for every single damn battle. Should I risk it? Should I take a risk? What are the odds and what are my positioning and my situation within the army? What am I trying to accomplish? It's constantly making questions that are gonna have consequences and a huge impact if you don't answer them correctly. And that's where we go into the narrative, because of course we would go into the narrative. So basically what we have in most games is that you have the character in the game world, in this case Leaf, and the reality, who is the player, who is you. And then you have the results, and the results tend to be on the same line. They are usually like supposed to be the same, but the intention tends to differ. They like the player wants to do something, the character wants to do something else. And then even if the results kind of are the same, oh yes, a little narrative dissonance kind of appears here. Um, Kind of, it feels weird that you want to do something and that the character wants to do something else. But Thracia is one of those beautiful games in which those things are actually the same. The player and the character have the same intention because the mechanics are laid in such a way that it kind of propels that. It's pretty cool. For example, this is kind of basic, but imagine there's a unit, it's called Nana, and she's like around a bunch of enemies. So you can choose to help her or run away to safety. Leaf has an intrinsical narrative connection to Nana because she has been with him like for all the time. She ran with him when they burned his castle, and like they gone through the wars basically. And the player also kind of has a connection to Nana because she's a really good unit and she is crucial for some development in the game, etc. So basically, both come from a place of caring. Both have the intention of protection, and because that intention aligns, it creates an immersiveness that also derives into a meaningful decision. When you're choosing to either help Nana or escape to safety, it's not just is this unit, important. It's rather it's important to me. It's I care about this. And the fact that the character in world, in fact, the fact that Leaf cares as well, creates an empathy with him. And like that is extremely important. We're going to talk about that later. First, though, we're going to talk about capture. Capture also has a intrinsic narrative question, and I've already kind of mentioned it: the to kill or not to kill kind of question, right? Because of course, as I said, this mechanic is a high risk, high reward situation. Is should I risk someone precious to me in order to get a weapon that could be potentially useful in the future? But it also means saving that enemy. It's also a show of compassion intrinsically. Even though I'm gonna admit it's true that when you're playing, you're not feeling like freaking Jesus saving everyone. Like, I'm gonna show you my compassion by attacking and capturing you. Is like, no, it doesn't feel like that. But theoretically, narratively, that's kind of what's going on actually. And the game really pushes this forward because there are some instances in which you actually feel compelled to be compassionate and to feel this respect. And that's with some very particular units. Technically, they tend to be bosses or mini bosses. Basically, the ones that don't have the same sprite as every other soldier, that those are the good ones. But of course, that is done because there's limitations to the creation of the video game. But ideally, what it's trying to say is that by showing compassion, you become a better ruler and a better leader, and you make the world a better place, basically. So, for example, for the three characters in the top, if you rescue them, if you capture them and you don't release them at the end of the map, they join your army, and it's very cool because you get new units and you get to meet them and know who they are. And I especially like the guy at the right, the top, Sayas, not Sayas, sorry, Salam. because he's is kind of a subversion of the evil guy trope. It's pretty cool. Then there's also Reinhardt example. It's like the guy in the middle, the biggest guy. It's I love my Reinhardt. Reinhardt is really cool, and he is not recruitable, unfortunately. But and yes, it's the guy that I made go berserk and kill his own men. It's kind of a tragedy, but you know, kind of beneficial to me, so I will allow it. But the whole point is that he then got sleeped by the enemy boss, and then when a cavalry unit gets sleep, they become infantry, and you can capture them. And the whole thing is that I could complete the map without having to kill Reinhardt. And I love Reinhardt, so I don't want to kill him. So that even if narratively that served no purpose, like the game didn't change anything because I saved Reinhardt, but the fact that I could complete the map without having to kill him kind of made me feel good, right? Made me feel like my actions really had consequences. And then there's the guy in the right bottom part. He's a boss. If you rescue him if you capture him instead of killing him, he tells you, "Oh, you're pretty cool, actually. There's some guys in trouble there. If you go, it would be pretty cool." And then you go and you kind of recruit more people. So it's also a different way to show how the capture mechanic can also influence the narrative, whatever. And finally, kind of the last thing to say, again, this is all very theoretical, but even though the game is theoretically throwing you the option of saving everyone, it's also spitting on your face because it's like, no, that's not going to happen. This is a war, right? And you have to kill people. That's kind of the point, because there's opposition. Opposition means this, and the game makes sure to force you to kill people. There's never going to be like a safe moment in which you can go full pacifist, because the game understands that it's not so easy as to just say we're gonna be best guys ever. No, you're gonna have to kill people. And of course, because this decision is made, capture gains more power, because if capture was just something that you could spam mindlessly and just save everyone and everything is super easy, it kind of would lose the punch of actually like saving someone through that mechanic. So basically, kind of what I've been explaining until now in the narrative department is that you have a lot of choice and you have a lot of ways to do this, and it's very dynamic and gives you so many options, right? But at the same time, the game starts on the title screen and ends in the credits. And this is very stupid on my part, like I didn't really think this through. But what I'm trying to say with this crappy metaphor is that the game starts in point A and ends in point B. You cannot really change the story. The story is Leaf starts, he's exiled from his country by an evil empire, and then you have to retake it. And the end is that you win. Spoilers, right? Like it's literally every Fire Emblem ever. But the whole thing is that Fire Emblem uses this double narrative trick, and it's kind of a relative concept, and it's not really that different from how games usually treat narrative, but I think it's specific enough so that I may proceed to explain. And yes, I found this image that is like the perfect representation of what this whole thing is going to be about, and definitely not casual stumbling upon it through the internet, whatever. Basically, in one page we have Leaf's story, and then in the other page we have the army, the story of the people who fight with Leaf. So kind of we can divide the Fire Emblem story in two: the Leaf story and the army story. Keep that in mind. Okay, so what we have in the your run of the mill game, your typical game, you've got your cinematic or your plot moment, and then you have your gameplay. And in your gameplay, you do stuff, you kill enemies. And the question that is being asked in the gameplay is, did you finish the mission? Yes, continue to the next plot point, or no, repeat the mission, and when you succeed, continue to the next plot point. Right. So Fire Emblem kind of has the same thing. Fire Emblem has plot, and in this case, it's extremely pronounced because it's basically you just can't move. You go to a different screen, and they tell you a bunch of crap like, "Oh no, we're in danger," yada yada, whatever. And then you go to the map, and you can play, and you can do stuff, and then you go back to exposition. So it's very clear what's going on. But the interesting part of the double narrative is that what there's a dissonance, right? Or rather, there's a difference because the Leaf plot, the overall plot that is unchangeable, unmovable, always the same. But then there's the army plot. And the army plot is where you come in. In the army plot, anything can happen. It's not anymore a matter of did you complete the map, did you make your objectives. It becomes a matter of who is alive and who is not. It becomes a matter of your choices. Because theoretically, you can literally kill all of your units and only leaving live alive. And the overall plot is going to be the same. The overall plot is live, win, good. But the army plot, of course, is going to be completely different. It's going to be the story of a leader that was so freaking incapable of commanding his army that he lost every single soldier and had to fight this war alone. Or you can be an amazing leader and no one dies, right? Like there's all this spectrum in there. And because there's really nothing defined, it all happens emergently. Everything that happens there is a consequence of Leaf's actions. Everything, which in turn, by the way, is your actions, everything is controlled by Leaf. Sure, the enemies move, there are reinforcements, things happen. You have to adapt, which is kind of a big theme of this game. The position of a leader and how they react and make sacrifices and have to make difficult decisions to ensure the best of the best for the people. And these kind of situations and the fact that everything that uh, kind of derives from them is a consequence of your actions. It's what creates the immersiveness. It's what creates the meaningfulness. It's what empowers the player to take the role of the commander. It's not just a player and Leaf. They are the same person, even if Leaf is not really an avatar. Even if Leaf has his own character and personality and etc. Just this coordination of their functions is what unites them into the same objective and kind of the same mind in a way. So basically, in a way to illustrate this, and we're kind of finishing with this is map 17B, and this map is probably my favorite in the whole game, even if it's not that good. So basically, the whole thing is that you're reaching your hometown. By the way, this is mid game, so like no way near the end. You're reaching your castle, the castle from where you were expelled when you were 5 years old, and the empire took control over, right? So you're basically reach here, and it's like, okay, we're finally doing this. We're just in the middle of our journey, but this is important because and emotionally, sentimentally, this is home, is Liv's home, right? So basically, you reach here, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, but basically, if you go through the bridge and then you keep going north, and then you go to the left, you can see that the way to enter the castle is this very narrow path that is populated by ballistas. Ballistas are these guys that have giant arrows. Giant arrows tend to be pretty bad for your health, so I recommend staying away from them. But in this case, you are forced to kind of get on the range. And of course, as I said, mid game, it's not really a good place to start losing units. Not really. So this guy comes out. Basically, if you visit any of the villages, which by the way is extremely incentivized in all Fire Emblem games to visit villages, so it's something that the player will naturally do. So if you visit any village without, or rather with a character that is not Leaf, they're gonna tell you, oh, where's Leaf? Where's Prince Leaf? Yada yada. So when you go with Leaf and you speak with them, this guy appears and he's like, my God, Prince Leaf, we've been waiting for you 10 years. We've been tortured and abused. And we've gone through the worst of the worst by the hands of the Empire. And now you're rich here and you're gonna save us all. So we propose you this, right? We are in deep shit. So what we can do and we're willing to do is we will get in the middle of these ballistas and we will become literally meat bait to actually allow you the possibility that you could probably take this castle so that through that you can probably or just maybe with a slight higher probability defeat the empire. So this is no guarantee. This is just a lot of probablys, right? And basically what you have to say is, do you kill the people that have been waiting 10 years for you in extreme suffering and poverty, or do you take the risk of losing the soldiers that will liberate this country or that will try to liberate this country and put them at risk and kind of obviously the whole objective of liberating this country just because you are being sentimental? It's basically telling you, are you going to be pragmatic or are you going to be emotional? And that's a struggle for both the leaf and the player. And that struggle, as we said, it creates empathy. So because there's no right answer, because both cases are valid answers to traverse this problem, it creates a meaningful decision no matter what you're doing. And this is the kind of situations that can only be achieved because there's this narrative in which you are Leaf and Leaf is you. There's this absolute Zen situation here. And it wouldn't be possible if there was a dissonance between those two parts. Basically, the difficulty of the game requires informed decisions. And because these informed decisions occurs within your narrative, we reach meaningful and emotional decisions, which is everything that a game should try to achieve. Maybe apart from immersiveness and a dynamic game, but that kind of implies also meaningful and emotional decisions. But we're going to theory of gaming that is not really needed for this presentation. So that's kind of the point. Mechanics are really good. Game narrative is really good, but Thracia has problems. It's true, and it pains me, but it's true. And Shozo is a mad genius, but he's also an idiot sometimes. And he like this is just gonna be a rant, right? At this point, I'm just gonna like spend 3 minutes ranting about all the bullshit this man put in his game. So basically, like this boss is stupid. Like the whole game spends you telling that you should capture and you should strategize and try to be smarter than the game and whatnot. So basically, they reach this map and they say, okay, you should stay here and take care of the city, right? But then these boss has really cool weapons, and because you have already been conditioned to check weapons and try to capture all the units that will serve you, yada yada, your logical train of thought is okay, I can leave most units here protecting the city and then send a squad to actually get this boss's weapon. He is accompanied by 2 units that attack you at range, which means that you're gonna need to survive from 2, 3, 4 turns of attacks that you cannot retaliate against, which to begin with is pretty disgusting. But once you reach the boss, or rather, it's actually at turn 9, I think, or 10 or 8, I don't remember. But at the end of the chapter, because the limit is 10 turns, a bunch of dragons or well, dragon riders appear in here, and they are a lot of them. You have no warning they are coming whatsoever, and they screw you. They're gonna kill you because you tried to play how the game is telling you to play, which is like, what the heck is going on? I don't even know. Somehow they thought that was a good idea. Whatever. Another thing, Xavier. Like, there's a unit called Xavier. The game, right? Like, needs you to do the biggest juggles in freaking video game history to recruit this guy. Like you freaking have to put all these people to speak with these other people, like the villagers with some of the soldiers. But then within the soldiers, there's the one marked in blue spheres, well, circles. Those are actual true enemies, so they will kill the actual enemies, but also the villagers. But then you only have to open one door, because if you open the other one, it's kind of gonna get screwed, and then the villagers have to talk to the other ones, and then it's a fucking mess. And it's so narrow, you don't really have space to retaliate, to strategize, to anything. It's, my God, this guy, like, what is going on? Who thought of this? This is a mess. I hate this. The point I think they were trying to do, say, tell, whatever, is that Xavier, like, he had such a difficult like story, and like, oh no, he suffered so much because of war and everything. And because they cannot really control the sympathy of the player, they're like, well, whatever it is, right? They may be heartless bastards, or they may just be crybabies. Whatever it is, we can condition the empathy of the player through the pain that Liv is feeling, the struggle that Liv is going through, like literally everything that has happened before, except in this case, the struggle that the player has to go through is so much more than any struggle that Liv would have in world, that it just, you don't care. You just want Xavier to die. There's no Thracia 776 player that says, oh yeah, right, recruiting Xavier, that's funny. Haha. No, no, that's not gonna be the case. So like that's kind of, there's a lot more shit to rant about, but let's not let's not do it, okay? It's a good game, I swear. So basically this is kind of like a scheme that I made, like a framework for narrative creation of video games, parting from the message. And I kind of made the translation into how Thracia would adapt to this. kind of, just wanted to make a link with the first presentation I did. It's not really a demonstration of anything because I'm just taking concepts here and putting them into moments of the game. But you know, something I thought would be cool, just putting it here. And like as I say here, there's the mechanic here. The main one I think is the capture, but then there's a bunch of other mechanics that complement the game to make it fun and engaging and whatnot. So this is probably the second most important slide. Like this is what I want you to look at. Um, this is the point of this presentation. The Everything is connected, right? When you're designing a game, you don't do it but like what's funnier or like what's gonna make the game more entertaining. No, you are designing with head. Designing is a creative work, but it's also not random. It's something that you're doing consciously. So the fact that they made the capture mechanic, which, as I said before, is what I think the the place from which everything kind of started, because it doesn't really make sense to start with the fatigue system or with the low stat cap or with the few weapons. It's like capture seems to be like the central point of the game. So to make it work, they had to adapt the few weapons, and they also had to adapt the fatigue system and the low stat cap and all the kind of sub mechanics to adequate the ambientation of the game, and all of that basically kind of like this is a mix of mechanics and dynamics. It's not simply one thing, which kind of messy. But I just wanted to put a lot of arrows everywhere to make it seem like I understand what the heck is going on actually. So basically, this capture mechanic, and by the way, the red arrows kind of signify what gives meaningfulness, although it's discussable, but whatever. This capture mechanic is giving player agency, and this player agency is the objective. Everything should relate to player agency. Everything should be done to somehow, in a way, affect this agency, to give the player the tools to express themselves and discover themselves through play. And what is cool is that it takes that mechanical concept of what video games are, and it translates it to a narrative concept. Suddenly, it's not anymore the player's agency, is Leaf's agency, is who is Leaf and what is his place in the narrative, and how you understand what being a leader and what taking difficult decisions is, and how these people that are performing so well despite the problematics that they are facing feel. And that is an extra layer that gives meaning and context to all the actions that occur in the game. And basically, what this all comes to say is that game design and story should smooch. They should be friends. They should be together and always happy and in love, right? That's the point. If you're gonna do a narrative design, please, game design and story, they are the same. There's no way that you design a game that doesn't have some kind of narrative within it. And there's no story in video games that doesn't require a game design behind it. Right? So rejoice, brothers and sisters. Narrative design will save us all our souls. That's kind of the end of the presentation. Not quite though. So before anyone wants any question though, I want to like make shout out. Racecar made all the comics I used. There's also a bunch of images that I didn't give credit to people for because I'm lazy or I couldn't find them or I forgot them because my memory is trash. So there's that. The Shiba dog meme I found like 2 days ago. I love it. Shibas are adorable and the meme was hilarious and very appropriate. So I couldn't find who made it, but special shout out to that person. If you want to play 3776, congratulations. After like 20 years of being in Japanese and no one playing it, we have an English version. Project Exile is the way to go. I would recommend starting the saga if you haven't with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, because I think it's like the more balanced game of Fire Emblem to begin playing. Really easy to emulate. It's from GameCube and Wii, I think. But if you really, really want to jump into Thracia 776, I would recommend first, though, playing Genealogy of the Holy War, because Thracia is kind of a midquel. It occurs between the first and second part of the genealogy. So, kind of, it doesn't really give you context. You don't really know what's going on. You just do things. So, if you want to experience a more planned narrative that's not so much your experience with the character, if you want to know what is actually going in world, I would recommend first playing Genealogy. It has huge maps, but it's my favorite Fire Emblem. I think the story is the best one in all the saga. So that's my personal recommendation. So now I am actually done. Thank you for your attention. And if anyone has any question or anything to say, hey, not even an hour. Pretty good actually. So now would be the moment.
Lo primero de todo, un aplauso tú. Está muy fino.
Oh boy, right. I have this silenced. Feels bad. Like he's okay, right. And yeah, exactly. Like a big point. Like Shozo is known to be the kind of person that is obsessed with war. Like all his games were kind of wanting to get this feeling of like what war is like and this place of responsibility. Just that Thracia, precisely because it's an equal to genealogy of the Holy War, kind of couldn't really expand on story. So they tried to aim at that feeling of being in a responsible place. And like it's this kind of things of like, well, shit just went wrong. Live with it. That's life. That's literally the feeling that they wanted to achieve. And it's also the reason why they put so much bullshit. Like Xavier thing is so outrageous, but it kind of makes sense. Like they did this to give you this feeling of, well, this is life. You deal with it or you just take the easy route. But it still was just like too nope. But you know, um despite that, there's a lot of other mechanics that yes do this job really well and don't really have this factor of bullshit. Mhm. Yeah, right. Like, well, I'm really not giving you that much context. This idea that the point is, even though you don't think you're Jesus showing mercy, there's something there making you take the decision that you want to make it. Yeah, really. Like, um, yeah, it's kind of that. Like, it's more a matter of making these moments kind of feel important of like, hey, you're not just, as I said, kind of, you're not capturing because this is a joke and like save everyone, love and peace, right? This is a war, and like making these is a risk. Capturing people is a risk. Showing compassion is a risk. It's not something that you can selflessly do without any kind of consequences. Right. Yeah. I mean, you have. I mean, you can kind of go full Jesus and like do whatever you want. It's just you don't really have the option to be full Jesus every time. Like, well, I mean, narratively, you kind of are because you're like kind of beating this giant empire. I don't really know if I'm getting your point across, but um, like yeah, it's not end up, but you have the chance of being Jesus and saving anyone at any point, with more or less difficulty, of course. Okay.